Hello, you are listening to Talk to Seattle, and I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode of the show, I have Scott from the Lit I-5 campaign. This was a really great episode. It's a little bit shorter than usual because we had some technical difficulties, but eventually we figured it out and I got it all edited and I'm finally releasing this episode. I really enjoyed this conversation. It is a really, really interesting topic. But before we get to the interview, I have this quick message. If you're listening to this show, you are probably a fan of podcasting and you'd probably appreciate local content. So I might have something interesting for you. I've made this list. It's a list of podcasts, of Seattle area podcasts. This list is intended to be a complete catalog of every podcast from the Seattle area. We have hundreds of podcasts on there right now. So if you're looking for more locally produced independent media, this list is for you. You can find the list at seattlepodcasters.com/list. Like I said, there's hundreds of podcasts on this list, and we even have categories. I've got categories for food and drink, civics and politics. We've got geek culture. We've got a section for D&D. There are just so many awesome shows on there. Please check it out. Once again, it's at seattlepodcasters.com/list. And remember, this is supposed to be a complete list. So if you have a podcast or if you know someone who does have a podcast and they're not on the list, please contact me as soon as possible and I will add them. So one more time, to find hundreds of local podcasts, just go to seattlepodcasters.com/list. And if you don't remember, there's going to be a link, of course, in the show notes. This is Talk to Seattle, and I'm your host, Jason Rigden. On this episode of the show, I'm here with Scott Bonjukian of the Lit I-5 campaign. How are you today?
Good. Thanks for having me.
So could you tell me a little bit about the goals of the Lit I-5 campaign?
Sure. So we are a very long-term, forward-looking organization, and our goal, in a nutshell, is to make I-5 disappear and to reconnect the neighborhoods, their core urban neighborhoods that have been divided by the freeway for over 50 years. And at the same time, also create new public land that we desperately need for a variety of public and private uses.
And so how much of I-5 would be covered?
Well, the downtown area is the feasibility study of the city of Seattle is about to begin is looking at Denny Way to Madison Street, which is about 15 acres of developable area. So we're not saying that entire area will be lidded, but that's kind of the scope of the current project. So 15 acres, that's I don't know, that's about 10 to 12 city blocks, so not a small amount.
So when I-5 was first made, it really cut a really big scar in the middle of the city. I don't think people really realize how significant it was.
Yeah, and so I did my thesis research on this at the UW, and one of the notable things I remember reading about it is although there was some protesting, particularly from the First Hill community, there was not a whole lot of opposition to the freeway. And I think that's because their freeways were really new at that time. You know, this is the late 50s, early 60s. No one really knew what they looked like. But as I'm sure people know, by the late 60s, early 70s, after freeways had been in and people realized the physical and environmental impacts they had, that's when what started known as the Freeway Revolts, and a number of projects were halted in various cities across the country once people realized what freeways looked like. But Seattle got away fairly scot-free in terms of, we have, a double-edged sword. We don't have a whole lot of freeways compared to our population, but it's also a matter of geography. So certainly, it divides some of the city's most dense and diverse neighborhoods today.
In this area, we actually have several freeways that do have lids right now, right?
Yeah, so Seattle's interesting in that, actually, Greater King County has some of the largest concentration of freeway lids in the country, which is great because that makes us realize WSDOT, the Washington State Department of Transportation, we know they have both the willingness and the expertise to do this. So it's just a matter of applying efficacy and generating public support at the right points.
What would be some of the biggest benefits of lidding I-5?
Well, it's great because it's kind of a win-win-win situation. First, there's obviously the environmental benefits of you reduce, at least locally, right near the project, you could reduce some of that air pollution on the neighboring buildings and residents, reduce that noise. But more broadly, and from kind of a city building perspective, you basically create new land out of thin air that you can build almost anything on top of, which is extremely valuable for a very dense and growing city, and a city that's running out of private land and where land values are extremely high. And at the same time, we know that the I-5 freeway potentially needs some kind of maintenance work or rehabilitation. And so if we can integrate lids into that conversation, we can kind of help all those transportation and public benefits happen at the same time.
And then who would own the land above I-5?
Typically, the way it works is that WashDOT or whatever state DOT owns the freeway, they will typically lease the air rights. So, and they'll maintain the understructure, the steel or concrete beams, and then a local entity such as a city or the county or a private developer will maintain the surface of the lid and whatever buildings are on top of it. So it's kind of a delicate legal situation how they work, but typically that's the arrangement.
And how much would this cost to actually put this lid over I-5?
Well, that's one reason that over the past 3 years we've advocated for the city of Seattle to do a major feasibility study that will look at engineering and urban design, but also financing in terms of how much will it cost, what could the revenue sources be. We have a really vague general idea that we're always hesitant to throw out there, but it's looking at some other park and private building projects that have been built over freeways across the U.S. It comes to about something like $500 or $600 a square foot, and there's 43,000 square feet in an acre, so you extrapolate from there. But that $500 a square foot compares to the value of downtown land in Seattle, which is somewhere around $1,000 a square foot or more. So we think there could be some kind of value capture opportunity there to help fund it.
And how would this impact Freeway Park and the convention center?
Great question. So those are obviously the first lids that were built over I-5. As far as we can tell, those structures will stay in place, but future lids kind of north and south of them will have to integrate with them. For example, we probably wouldn't replicate the exact design of Freeway Park. As beautiful as it is, it does have some design problems. So future lids might take some design cues from those two projects, but would adopt best practices in design and hopefully integrate the entire corridor into kind of a seamless public space.
So could you tell me a little bit about the organization behind this campaign?
Yeah, so the Lit I-5 Steering Committee is a group of all volunteer folks, mostly working in kind of the design and development world. And we're volunteering our time because we care about the future of the city, the public health and environmental quality. And we've been organized for about the past 3 years, since 2015. And our role has really been to just generate conversation and ideas. Contrary to what some folks perceive, we are not advocating for any specific use or design of the lids. We're really interested in gathering community inputs and hearing what our neighbors want on top of this new public land, knowing that it's a long-term project. We're thinking 5, 10, 15 years into the future before anything will really come to fruition. And so to that end, we've also been meeting with elected officials just in an advocacy role. We manage a website and social media just to keep people updated on our work. And yeah, we're just really excited to add how our efforts have gained momentum probably more quickly than some of us thought it would.
So what have been some of the biggest challenges of running this campaign?
Certainly time. I don't sleep a lot. We do have one consultant we retain for some professional services. Actually, we have several consultants. But as a volunteer endeavor, it's definitely a privilege to be able to be in a position to volunteer my time outside of work hours and sometimes during work hours. So that's always a challenge. We've definitely had volunteers burn out, but it's I'm young. I'm probably the youngest person in the group. So if we build it before I retire, I'll be happy. But certainly that's kind of that resource management has been one of the biggest challenges. We're not a nonprofit, but we kind of operate like one. And so most nonprofit organizations will tell you the same thing.
And so what are your plans for the future?
So we just, as I mentioned, the feasibility study is being planned by the city of Seattle. We're closely working with them right now on the scope of that, the qualifications for the consultant team they're going to hire, things like that. Throughout 2019, that feasibility study will occur, and so we'll be there kind of in an advisory role. And 2019 might actually be a little bit more of a quieter year than our previous year, since we secured the funding, we have convinced a lot of folks, the public, elected officials, that this is a good idea. So throughout 2019, we'll be just kind of laying the groundwork for future years, which will be kind of the next step, which will be taking the feasibility study, looking at the data and the information it gives us, and figuring out what the next steps will be in terms of design, funding, engineering, continuing to work with WashDOT on their corridor planning. And long term, hopefully the city adopts this as an official project to actually build and construct. So that's kind of that's the big picture goal. But in the meantime, we're just going to kind of plot along and continue working on the day-to-day of building support and gathering information.
And if people want to get involved, how can they do that?
The easiest way to be involved is just join our mailing list. We send out newsletters once or twice a week that you can sign up at lidi5.org, which is our website with more information. You can also contact us if you're interested in volunteering your time or expertise in various ways. We're always looking for extra hands. And of course, you can also donate. So Tuesday happens to be Giving Tuesday, and donations support our volunteer efforts as well.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Absolutely. Glad I could help spread the word.
Thank you so much, Scott, for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it. The idea of Lidding I-5 is amazing, and I am 100% for it. If you want to learn more about the Lit I-5 campaign, please check the show notes below. We've got all the links right down there. You've been listening to Talk to Seattle, and I have been your host, Jason Rigden. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Talk to Seattle is hosted and produced by me, Jason Rigden. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please email jason@talktoseattle.com. Our theme music was Lobby Time by Kevin MacLeod, Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0